Mirjam, well, it's taken us an awfully long time, hasn't it, to organise this podcast. I know, but I'm really appreciate because I know you're an incredibly busy person, and I really appreciate the fact you're able to give us an hour of your time. So
I'm glad we finally were able to make it work. So
it's all good, all good. So so just to kind of set the scene for the listeners, I'll just say a few words. So I've known Mirjam now for some years.
More than 20 years.
More than 20 years. We've never worked together, but Mirjam's been associated with various clients that we've been working with over the time. And I've kind of tracked Mirjam's career over that time. I think the first time we met was in an airport in Amsterdam. I think it was then.
Well, but we did work together, I think, on something at HP.
Well, maybe not directly, but maybe, yeah, indirectly we did. Okay, so I stand corrected on that. But no, it's not often that you find senior level executives in an HR role. I think playing some of the kind of roles that you've been playing over time. So normally the people that we have on the podcast are people, senior sales leaders, and others. And I think you may be the first person we've had on the podcast who's kind of moved from a sort of perhaps a sales enablement area now into a global HR director of, a large company. So in that sense, I think we're very lucky to have you on the podcast.
You.
So for the listeners, though, Mirjam, what we'd love to do before we get started around the topics of culture and transformation is I wonder if you could just track your history. How did you get to where you are today?
Exactly. How much time do we have?
Well, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, because I think it's always interesting to understand, the journey that, where have you come from informs who you are today. And so
exactly. No, it is happy to say a few words because I don't have a traditional HR background, which actually, to your point, I think has helped me to get to where I am today as a chief HR officer of a big multinational. Because I started my career in the field of training and development. My first real job was actually organizing big management conferences at that time for Management Center Europe. So I was living in Brussels.
Yeah.
And through that, I spent time in other organizations working on either customized training and development programs for senior execs or for salespeople or other specific audiences. But then being on the outside, so working for an external provider and working with, larger companies. And then eventually I made the move to go inside a big company when I joined Compaq Computers. And then a year later, we were taken over by Hewlett Packard. And in Hewlett Packard, I had the opportunity, I was there almost 9 years. I had the opportunity to move then from sort of general leadership development, skills development, to specifically sales development, but then also became part of the sales strategy team. And together with, at that time, and by then it was already Hewlett Packard, at that time we had in Europe, Middle East, Africa, it was about 3,000 salespeople. And we decided as the biggest region to drive the sales excellence process. So we changed our go-to-market model. And as a result, we had to understand, do we have the right people in the right roles, and how do you develop them, but also how do you measure them? So also your whole sales, CRM systems were changed, etc. And I worked for a fantastic EMEA sales VP at that time. And he said, you can only do sales development when you're part of the sales strategy / transformation team. So I was double-headed. And that taught me a lot about the whole, way of selling and, of course, the organizational model. And based on what we did at that time in EMEA, the rest of Hewlett Packard got wind of it, and they used the methodology across the whole company. And that landed me in my first real HR role, because then they said, do you want to do HR for sales and marketing? So then I moved to the US, to the head office in Palo Alto, and became a global HR director for global sales and marketing.
Okay.
So based in California, and having a global role, did that for 2 years, and then HP changed a lot as a company, so left the organization after almost 9 years. But from then on, I've been in big international HR roles. Moved to Luxembourg, moved to Switzerland, so I've covered a lot of countries in the meantime, and also switched industries. Ended up in manufacturing. And the company I work for today, GRUNDFOS, is my fourth manufacturing company. So I've been in the world of Masco, which is home improvement, kitchens, bathrooms, windows, for the first time dealing with blue-collar workers' environments. Then moved to Amcor, packaging company, very high-paced culture. Was there for 5.5 years, spent 5.5 years at Schindler Elevators, also in an HR role, and then again in the global learning and development role. And now back in Chief HR Officer for GRUNDFOS, which is water pumps, water treatment, and providing clean water to the world and driving energy savings, as we say. And what I notice is, particularly the last 15 years, I've always been part of business teams. So working with my colleague, head of R&D or the head of sales or the divisional leaders, or, making sure that whatever we did in HR was based on the business strategy. But also being in their meetings, going to customer visits, going into the business. But by now they see that I take a slightly different approach than just looking at the HR agenda, because it's also what I'm passionate about. So that kind of is the short
That's the
version.
background. Well, I think that's great. It's a great sort of an account, and I think that like you were just alluding to, the the ability to work back from strategy into HR is probably one of the things that was obviously recognized in you. I think from all those days when you're at HP, and I can see as your career's developed, you've sort of made the link between strategy and HR, and bridging that process. And I think it is quite interesting, because when you talk to people about what do you think about HR, a lot of people don't think that highly of HR, because they see them as not strategic. They tend to block things. They don't facilitate progress. So I think it's very, it's great to see that you've sort of taken the approach that you've done, because I imagine that you can provide such huge value, to the organizations that you work for.
Yeah, because of course you need a strong foundation of the right systems and the processes and the policy, and but then you really need to see what drives the business success. And I always say HR is not a support function; it's an enabling function.
Right.
Because having the right people in the right roles at the right time, delivering the business strategy, that is what you do it for. And particularly also, again, in my current role, I've also been on several customer visits to try to understand how do we work with customers. First of all, what do we provide to customers to learn the business? But at the same time, how do we interact with them? How do we sell to them? How do we look at opportunities that go beyond one? If you deal with a global customer who has multiple factories around the world, why are we only dealing with one factory? Why can we not support the others? How can you make things scalable? And what does that mean for the skills that salespeople have?
So what I'd love to talk to you about is the sort of topic of, sort of culture and transformation, because a lot of the businesses that you've been in have been going through a process of significant change. And we've always explored this from the sales angle, sort of how are your customers transforming? And I think the great thing about this podcast is that you've got these sort of inside it, you can look inside, and you're obviously, when you join a company and you're in this senior level role, I guess you are making a judgment call about, what is the culture, how do they work, and how do we need to transform?
Yeah.
So could you maybe just share with me your thoughts around those two words,
Yeah.
and maybe some of the challenges that you've seen organizations face as they try to effect change inside the organization?
No, it's been really interesting, because if I now look back, it has actually been a common theme through all
Okay.
the roles that I've had, that I was pulled into roles because there was a big transformation, either planned or going to happen, or they were in the middle of it. So somehow I kind of seem to rotate to it because I enjoy it, and also I know how to do it. There are many things that I don't know how to do, but this is where I can get my head around it.
Yeah.
And where I've seen cases where it works very well is that you always start first with, why are we doing it?
Yeah.
What is the rationale? And usually it's a big M&A or growth scenario, or increasing market share, or improving visibility of a company. There are a number of reasons why you go through significant transformation, or the results are not good.
Yeah.
That's of course, when profits are going down or results are going down, what do you need to do? And then starting with your sort of baseline story of the why you do it and what are the critical steps. And then, this sounds overly simplified, but communicate, communicate, communicate.
Yeah.
Because wherever I've seen it go wrong is when people do not understand why we are changing something, do not understand what's in it for them. So
Okay.
in a way, you have to build what I always say, I even use that with my own HR leaders. When we drive something big, you have to develop your internal elevator pitch. Like,
Right.
the people need to understand why we do it, what's in it for them, what's the desired outcome, and what are the different steps to get there. And if it's a long journey, okay, then you have to do that very often. If it's fast and short, you do it in a different way. But wherever I've seen it fail is if people are not clear about the direction, about why we do it, and that it's there, and then they think that's going to make their life more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
The situations where it has worked well is where you have that really sort of clear roadmap. Of course, you have to adjust when things move unexpectedly, but you have to make sure you bring all your stakeholders along when you want to drive it.
Yeah. If you were to look back on some of the sort of really successful transformations that you've been involved in, are there any sort of standout examples of, really big change and the organization, and perhaps describe some of the things that happened to make it so successful?
I mean, the one where I was only doing my tiny part because it was at the beginning of my career, but
Yeah.
the merger between Compaq and Hewlett Packard,
Yeah.
I mean, you've seen the business cases. That actually worked very well.
Yeah.
Because from day one, there were, the kickoff meetings, the fast start workshop, the fast forward workshop, the communication on daily basis, the information flow. The HR processes were rolled out very, very strongly in a consistent way across the globe. And even though the cultures of the two companies were very different, the compatibility worked well. Because Compaq was a sales machine with very, very strong sales leaders. And also after the merger, you could see that in a lot of key sales roles, they actually also put Compaq leaders.
Okay.
Because there was a lot of sales power there. But in other areas, HP was much, much more advanced. For example, also in HR, in terms of systems and processes. And the learning and development culture in HP was still one of the best I've ever seen in my career. So I think the compatibility was well. I mean, like I said, I at that time had a smaller role, so wasn't that heavily involved. But then later in my days at Amcor Packaging, we drove some big changes where we changed the divisional setup, we changed the regional setup, changed, I think, 90% of the executive leadership team. And everything was done very fast in a short period of time. I think it was all driven within 9 months. Now, in hindsight, I think that was sometimes maybe too fast. At
Okay.
the same time, it was very focused. There was a clear roadmap. There was a clear communication plan. People knew where we were going, the why, the what, and the how, and what we wanted to achieve. Now, of course, you always have people who are not happy with that, but that's
Yeah.
everywhere. Um, but I think for me, that was also an example of where it worked well, and I was part of the PMO driving that. In that time, at that time it was the Europe and Americas region, and then we changed the regional setup. But that worked well, also because there was a clear sort of vision of why are we going here. Yeah.
You keep on sort of coming back to sort of the importance of having a very clear, why, and a very clear sort of vision. And I remember some quote that I've seen, I think it was from Forrester, that where CEOs were interviewed about the time it takes to execute strategy, and they were frustrated that the board decisions were taken, in month one, but it just takes a long time, for you to get just to see the benefit of those strategies. And, I think they were saying on average 18 months later. And the world is moving so quickly, and so fast that the luxury of being able to wait for things to happen perhaps is not there as well. Can I talk to you a bit about culture? Because I think culture is, there are these wonderful quotes that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And what's your, you must see culture quite closely, because I guess HR is something that's really important, probably around the HR role. So could you tell me what your thoughts are around culture?
I'm actually personally always careful to use the word culture in an HR strategy, because you don't, culture is something that evolves. You cannot just design culture and implement culture. That is something that evolves throughout the years, and also is part of a company's DNA. And then, of course, you have not only the company culture, but then you also have the different country cultures, or the divisional cultures, or the functional cultures, of the different sub-teams, depending on the leader you have. But of course, you see a difference. Like the company I am in today has a very strong people culture, very focused on people. And this goes back to the roots that, it was founded 75 years ago by the grandfather of our current CEO. So there's a long tradition of, we're building something good for the world, and we're building something good for people. And we have managed to keep that DNA, which I really appreciate, because it's not that the focus on people is like, okay, we have to have it in a slide, and we have to have it in our values, and okay, we move on. It is genuinely lived, because there's also such a strong legacy in that company, and because of this family-owned dimension. But at the same time, in other companies, you also see a strong company culture that is created by the way you work, by the leadership, by the products, by the markets you're in. Is it fast moving? Is it slow moving? How do you sell to your customers? So in that sense, you do see a big difference. Can you change culture overnight? No, because this is, again, culture is linked to people. And if you change too many people too radically, you lose a lot of, intellectual capital, you lose experience, you lose knowledge. So you have to be mindful how you drive those type of changes. But of course, over time, when you bring in a different caliber of people that are in line with the strategy, you start shifting from a cultural point of view. So it impacts.
Yeah. So what would you, do you have a point of view about, if you were to be asked the question, what's more important, having an organization with the right culture but the wrong strategy, or the right strategy but the wrong culture?
Well, I wouldn't pick either one of them, because you need both.
You need both. Okay. I thought I'd put you on the spot with that question, but it's an interesting one, isn't it?
It is an interesting one because I have seen companies with the right culture, but with the wrong strategy,
Yeah.
you will not get anywhere. Your business results will not be there. And then eventually it started impacting your culture because you maybe have to lay off people, you have to
Yeah.
downsize, you have to cut budgets. There is a travel freeze, a hiring freeze, a expenditure freeze, which doesn't really positively impact the culture of, how do we work and how do we do things together. And it's this. I once learned about a model that I've also been using in leadership development ever since. It's this triangle between, you need to have a vision, a challenge, and support. But as a leader, you need to balance between those three, because if you only have a vision, but you don't provide support to your people, you don't challenge them, well, then how will we get there if there is no drive, if there is no, if you
Yeah.
only support people and you cuddle them in an exaggerated way, but there is no clear direction and there is no support of how to get there, you will not get anywhere either. And the same with the third dimension. So it's how do you balance those three angles? Because one cannot really function without the other, but particularly not if you are, commercially driven organization,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. It's interesting because we often, we ask sales directors the
Yeah,
question, what would you rather, a sales team with the right sales mindset, but not necessarily having the right skills and competence? Or would you rather have a sales team with the right skills and competence, but with the wrong mindset? And, they almost invariably come down to, well, we'd much rather have an organization with the right mindset, because if they've got the right mindset, they will learn, they will develop, they will, they will acquire the skills that are require, that they need to perform their jobs really well. But of course, you do need both. You need to have a balance between having the right. I mean, strategy and skills are two different things. I know, but
exactly. For me, that's two
yeah,
different things, because I
yeah,
would
it is.
fully agree. Like, you can teach people the right skills.
Yeah,
You cannot teach them the right mindset
yeah,
if they don't have that from the start. So in that sense, I would fully agree with that answer.
yes,
Strategy for me is a slightly different animal, you know?
yes.
Yeah.
But then, to quote one of the generals we've had on the
Yeah.
sales podcast, we've had
Yes.
the head. I don't know if you listened to his podcast, Sir Graham Lamb, who used to run the SAS. He said,
Yes.
he quoted some German general. He says, "No strategy survives contact with the enemy," and we had an interesting discussion with him, because in his sort of scenario, where
Yeah.
you strategize, you plan, and you work out every eventuality of something happening out in the field. At some point in time, you've got to let go of your teams, the teams that are trying to take, the vantage point.
Yeah.
And he said that's when, they need to be adaptable. You need to trust that they've got the wherewithal to say, well, if the strategy isn't going quite right,
Yeah.
that we need to adjust.
Yeah.
And so it's that ability to reflect and to change,
Yeah.
and I suppose it's a bit linked to this idea of the agility, that's
Yes.
spoken about in terms of organizational competence.
Yeah. And that is a challenging one, because I see it also in my current organization. It took us 3 years to implement a new organizational structure. We moved from a
Yeah.
country structure to a divisional structure, so based on
Okay.
customer segments.
That's
So
a big change. Yeah.
we have 4 divisions that are globally organized based on the different customer segments.
Yeah.
So different markets, different products, different customers. The structure has been implemented well. However, does everyone now understand how to work in this new matrix and
Okay.
how to leverage it? I would say no, we're not fully there yet. And we know that because this takes time. And there you see that, some people are more agile or more adaptable than others. And particularly if people have been for a very long time with an organization and have worked in a certain model, then you know it's more challenging to change it. What I also see is, again, what I said at the beginning, if you don't explain to them properly how to then operate in a virtual global environment with now international teams that you might not have had before, particularly for leaders, that you are in a matrix with maybe 3-4 different bosses, quote unquote, then you're not setting them up for success. So we're focusing heavily now on how can we equip people with the right skills to do that, whether
Okay.
it's, our sales force, whether it's our finance people, whether it's our operational people, how do you make sure that they understand to be successful in that model? Because implementing the model and the structure is one thing. However, you have to make sure that you equip your people to be successful. And this is where we're doing very well as an organization. That's not the point. I just feel we can do much more to help our employees be successful in this new model, which is clearly the way forward for the future. That's not, that's not a questionable statement. However, how do we make sure we help people operate in that model? And how do we also bring in potentially new skills and experience that we don't have yet that we need to drive this forward?
What would you say were some of the critical sort of skills and competencies required for organizations to survive in a world that's changing as fast as it is?
It is. There is this wise quote from one of the Greek philosophers: "You cannot change the wind, but you can adjust the sails."
Yeah.
Um, every leader in today's world, if you work in a profit-oriented organization, needs to have that ability, because you always need your plan B or your plan C.
Yeah.
And this mindset of continuous improvement and adjusting doesn't mean that you have to start one day, this is our strategy, and day two, that is our strategy.
Yeah.
But we have seen, particularly in the last years, with COVID, with the war in Russia, with now
Yeah.
geopolitical tensions in China, it is unpredictable. And if you as a leader are not capable of adjusting the right things and staying on the main course, but also understanding what needs to be done maybe unexpectedly, you will not survive. So for me, that flexibility, but also that mindset of, I said to my team the other day, for me, it's about constantly thinking 2 steps ahead, but also about making each other successful. So leverage what is happening around the organization and no surprises. So make sure that, particularly in your leadership team, you're well aligned,
Yeah.
so that you cascade the same behavior to the levels further down. Because not everyone is expected to be able to do that. But I think for leaders, it's essential. Because we have no crystal ball. No one can predict the future. You can make all the strategies that you want for the next 5 years, for the next 10 years. Yes, there is a certain course that you will follow, but the unpredictability in the market is going to remain for the time being.
Yeah.
So having this, the other day, I also read an interesting article. We talk a lot about IQ and about EQ, and this was talking about AQ, the adversity quotient.
Is that Paul Stoltz?
Yes.
Yeah, I know
And,
him. Yeah.
you know that model. And for me,
Yeah.
that one actually becomes much more interesting also when you hire leaders, plus then also the CQ, the cultural
Yeah.
quotient. Because global companies, you work internationally. You no longer work in a bubble within a certain country, within a certain culture. So those two elements for me are much more interesting to see what type of leader do you put in a role or do you bring on.
So how do you identify to what level they've got a high AQ? That's an interesting one. Well, I know that there are probably some psychometric type tests you can do, but that's quite interesting. So I guess that affects your recruitment strategy, I guess, and developmental strategy as well, in terms of resilience. And
it does, because if you talk about recruitment, I'm talking much more nowadays about the end-to-end sourcing strategy, because you need to look at different type of people that you bring in, or different
Right.
skill sets that you need to strengthen. And then it's not just you recruit for one role and you fill the role. It's okay, where can the person go afterward?
Okay.
Or where do we have a weakness in terms of succession pipeline or in general in skills? And how can we then make sure that we are more strategic with some of our top recruitments, that we bring in the right people who can also move around or move up or down or laterally. Because nowadays people don't join a company anymore, at least the majority doesn't, to stay there for the next 20 or 30 years.
Yeah.
So how do you retain talent in a way that they can also move around, or at least, can develop in a different way if they're interested?
And how you manage that on the scale? I mean, how many countries is GRUNDFOS in, and how many manufacturing sites do you have? You've got quite a number, I
So
believe.
60 plus countries, and
Yeah.
then we've got manufacturing sites in all the big countries around the globe.
Okay.
With, of course, a big hub in Denmark, but also a very big hub in Hungary, in Germany, in France,
Right.
in India, in China. So, and that of course is also then the balance between your blue collar workers and your white collar workers.
Yeah.
Because you have to source locally for your technical expertise for your blue collar workers,
Yeah.
which are in most cases also highly skilled workers with the right technical capabilities, but they are not necessarily mobile to go to another part of the country, or let alone another country. So depending on the roles that you look at, you need to source very differently.
Yeah. Must be quite an interesting process you go through to try and look at, succession planning on such an international scale. But I guess you've got a big team. You've got a good team of people around you that can
I've
help.
got a great team of people around me.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I wouldn't manage.
You wouldn't
And
manage. Yeah.
we are now also developing the next level of talent management, and
Okay.
also look at what we call talent pools. And for example, sales skills, really good salespeople that can also move across
Okay.
is a pool. Digital talent is a pool. We're also looking at, innovation skills. So we're looking both at sort of skills, but then also different age groups. Like we have a global graduate program. So how do we bring in young,
Yeah.
people who can further develop in the company? How do we focus on diverse talents? How do we strengthen leadership? How do we also enable people to move across functions or divisions?
Yeah.
So we're looking at it from multiple angles.
Can I ask what you think of sales as a function of a business?
I think it's a critical function for a commercial oriented company, because in the
Okay.
end, if we don't sell anything, if our customers are not happy, we might as well close up, So,
Okay.
you can
So
have the best product, or the best technology, but if you're not able to sell it, and then of course also have, particularly when you work with technical products, I saw it at Schindler as well, your maintenance, your modernization, your upselling, because in Schindler, the money was mostly made based on the service contract, not
yeah.
necessarily the new installation, which is a model that, is very similar in other manufacturing industries. So you also need to make sure that your service engineers understand how to upsell, advanced
Yeah.
selling skills, or provide modernization to your product, because otherwise you're out of business. So
Yeah.
for me, it's critical. It's
Yeah.
critical.
Yes, it's a critical function. Though from our experience, that
Yeah. Yeah.
it's quite often from a professional point of view, it's kind of not treated as a profession. Sales, people tend to fall into sales by accident. Engineers, particularly in the technical world, engineers do not like to be called salespeople. They like to be called engineers, particularly in the perhaps German-speaking countries, and so on, where I think it's changing, but it's very slow. But
I think it's changing.
okay, that's
Because in
good.
a way, in a way, having a commercial mindset is I mean, even in a function, or not even, I mean, also in a function like HR,
Yeah.
I want my HR leaders to also think about, okay, what is the business strategy? What are the priorities? How do we
Yeah.
achieve growth? And what does that mean for your people at Gemna? So they have to think commercially. And then
Okay.
also, how do we sell our ideas internally? Because it's a lot of stakeholder management.
Yeah.
It's not just like, okay, here's a policy or here's a program and people go do. And then I'm not talking about standards around compliance. Okay, that's a non-negotiable. We're not gonna.
Mm.
You need to have your code of conduct, your compliance, your
Yes.
standards, and your financial standards. But you need to understand stakeholder management. And for me, stakeholder management is whether you're in HR, whether you're in sales, whether you're in finance. You need
Yeah.
to you need to understand your stakeholders. So I think it is shifting. I think it is
Okay.
shifting. Yeah.
Well, that's really good to hear your points of view. I know you've got a background in sales. That's how we met all those years ago. But it's really good to kind of hear you say that. If you were looking back on on where you are now in your sort
Mhm.
of career, and you've obviously had a very successful career track up to the highest levels of HR. What for you have been the key learnings that you've taken away? What have been the key things that have enabled you to perhaps have
Yeah.
navigated your way in a very competitive
Yeah.
environment,
Yeah.
across multi-industry as well, which is interesting,
Yeah.
globally as well,
Yeah. Usually male-dominated environments, but
Well, I was
honestly,
going to ask. I mean, the technology, you succeeded in a world, at the highest level. I'm sure GRUNDFOS it's got a very diverse organization, but many times I'm sure you've been in the minority, perhaps as well. At the
yeah,
levels
today
at
I'm
which you
also
operate.
the only female on the management team, but honestly, for me, it's a non-issue. It's
Okay.
absolutely a non-issue. It's first of all, it's a great team and it's a great culture. And even in my last roles and company, it was very similar. Um, for me, it's never been an issue. It's about who you are and what you do and how you perform. Whether you're a man
Yeah.
or a woman, you have to deliver.
Okay.
So I've
You
never
didn't.
felt that as a barrier or as a
Yeah.
maybe others have, but again, for me, maybe because I take that attitude, I've never felt it as a barrier.
Okay.
But what has been important to get to where I am, I would also say, is having worked for some great leaders.
Okay.
I've had some really good managers who taught me a lot, who also, helped me move ahead, who gave me opportunities, who were willing to take risks and put me in roles without
Yeah.
having a lot of experience. However, they thought, if you never try, then you will never learn. And I was, of course, willing to take the risk and do that. So it works both ways. But at the same time, I've also worked for poor leaders who don't support you, and then you see the big difference.
Yeah.
So I think that is a key one. What I've also learned is if the opportunities come by, you do have to be willing to take a risk and not overthink it. And
Okay.
and just have the courage to do it. And then yes, it can go wrong. But the worst thing is that okay, it doesn't work and you go somewhere else, you learn from it, you move on, and you don't make the same mistake twice. Even though I don't even call it mistakes, it's like how do you learn from it?
How do you learn? Yeah.
But you need to have that sort of eagerness or willingness to take a risk, to get out of your comfort zone, to be open for the unexpected, to be entrepreneurial. Because if you just play it safe, for sure I wouldn't be where I am today.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that is important. And then staying curious and learning. There are so many things I still do not know. Yes, I know a certain area very well, but there are many things I don't know. And not fall into that trap like, well, you get to a certain executive level and you've seen it, done it, been there, you know how to do
Okay.
it. because every situation is different. And of course, you can leverage a lot of the things that you've done. However, staying curious and staying in tune with what is really happening in the role or the organization you're in, for me, is important as well. Because if you start sort of cruising along thinking that you know it all, I think you're not your best self. So having constantly a bit of a challenge, like, okay, this is new, let's try it, or this is, challenge yourself in a healthy way, of course. But that's what I've constantly been doing, and I still do it today.
Okay. Well, that's really good. So I wondered whether I could just, in the final few minutes, just, you must get approached by quite a lot of salespeople trying to pitch to you, and you probably fend a lot of people away.
Yes. Yeah.
If you were to give any advice, to any salespeople out there who are wanting to pitch to a senior HR director,
Yes.
what would your advice be?
For sure, the ones who just bombard you with emails and then try to go creative, like, well, you must have missed my first email, or you must have missed my second email, or why am I not getting your attention? I mean, just delete it. The cold calling for sure doesn't work for me either.
Okay.
Where they just barge into your day, not even asking, okay, am I calling at the right time, or what are you calling about? Or I just put down the phone. I would say the ones that I do give some airtime is where it is really much more focused on want to ask you a question, want to get some advice, or I have something that I think might benefit from you, but I'm sending it just as FYI. Have a look. So take a more low-key approach.
Okay.
And focus on establishing the relationship.
Right.
Particularly if you want to be in there for the long run. I mean, if it's a quick sales pitch or whatever, then okay, that's different.
So we were sort of asking questions about advice you might give for salespeople and what works and doesn't.
So for me, it's the trying to be very pushy, getting your foot in the door, bombarding people with information. Honestly, that doesn't work for me. Again, maybe it works for other people, it doesn't work for me. For me, it's more like someone who is able to raise my interest to say, I have something for you, or information that you might be able to benefit from. Have a read, have a look, or maybe we can just have a chat. No, nothing comes out of it. That's fine too. Because I've been working with some organizations where for years we've been in touch before we actually started working with something together. And really looking, particularly depending on the product that you sell. But if you want to establish a longer term relationship with a customer, then focusing much more on, okay, what is helpful for him or her in their role or company. Be mindful of, okay, schedules, times, giving it in a simple overview that people can read it, understand it, but take out the pushiness. I think that for me is the worst part. Yeah. Or people who sort of, particularly the ones who just call you out of the blue, who say, well, I know that you need our help because so and so, and I've done research about you. And I was like, okay, well, thank you very much. Boom, there goes the phone.
No.
So I don't know if that helps, but
I mean, it's a question that we ask when we do formal interview projects with customers, and we ask them what percentage of people that sell to you sell in a way that you think is remarkably good. If you were to put a percentage on it, Mirjam, what would you say? Of all the salespeople that have sort of pitched to you over time.
I'm being very, very harsh now. It's not even 5%.
Not even 5%. Okay.
No.
Okay, well that's fairly consistent to the research. It's less than the hundreds that we've interviewed, less than 10% is
Yeah.
the figure. But
Yeah.
that's really interesting. There's another question I wanted to ask
Yeah.
you, which is that you mentioned earlier, right at the beginning, that
Yeah.
you've been out to visit customers, and I
Yeah.
think that's amazing that
Yeah.
someone from HR should do that.
Yeah.
What were you hoping to achieve by talking to customers?
Well, for example, well, first of all, I can see then how our products are being used at the
Okay.
customer premises. Because we have, we're not just a pump company, we also drive the water treatment, the water solutions. We help
Okay.
particularly industrial environments also look at their water usage and saving energy, saving water, recycling water. So for me, it to physically see, okay, how are our products being used and what does it do for the customer? That's one thing. But also understanding what else can we do better?
Okay.
What is working in the relationship, what is not working in the relationship. And particularly, I visited a factory of a big global customer from actually it was in the packaging industry, so an industry that I know very
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
So I could also ask them questions about their business. So that was
Yeah.
a nice coincidence. But also understanding, well, if we help one part of that customer, how well are we connected with the rest of the customer, particularly when you talk about regional customers or global customers.
Yeah.
So that to me goes back to our go-to-market model, particularly for large customers, or, of course you have different models because one
Yeah.
of our customer segment is also the end user, like apartments and houses where they have small pumps for households. So that's a very different segment than an industry segment. But for me, it's like I said, threefold. First of all, to physically see and understand, okay, what are we doing there and how does it help improve their processes? What is going well, what is not going well, in terms of the products, but also the relationship and the service that they get. And are there opportunities to do more business, quite frankly? Um,
Okay. So you
you
went
know,
in with a HR hat on as well as a sales hat on as well.
I cannot help myself. I then immediately
Yeah.
start thinking, okay, I mean, what are we doing with this customer and how can we optimize it?
Right.
And I was also on some customer visits in other divisions, and I have one planned also now in August for our
Yeah.
domestic building services division, because I come from a different angle, and I
Yeah.
might very often be wrong, but maybe I see things that is obvious to me, but maybe not obvious to others, where I can
Yeah.
think of, is there a way that we can increase the service levels or
Yeah.
what we do with these customers?
Yeah. I think it's fantastic. Is that part of a policy of GRUNDFOS that exec board members get out to see customers, which I know used to happen at people, places like HP? That was one of their strategies, and it
We
worked very well.
we don't have it as a formal policy, but we do encourage it. And for example, I also spent beginning of this year, I spent 3 days in a factory in Germany for my shop floor training. So I worked, on assembling pieces, on
Okay.
electronics, I went through all the different
Okay.
parts of the factory. Of course, it helps that I speak German, so
Yeah. Yeah.
that was good. Um, and of course, we made some good publicity around it, but the feedback was amazing. That a lot of people were like, "Wow, every executive should do that." And for me, I've done that in all my roles to go actually
Okay.
into the production, into this is my fourth manufacturing company, as I said. I've done it in all the three others as well. That I go into production or on site to understand what people do, but also to talk to our employees.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
you hear a lot when you speak to employees on the shop floor.
Yeah.
So I don't do it because I think, well, it's good PR for Miriam. Of course, yeah, it creates visibility. But I think it also shows that you really want to know what's going on with your people at different levels.
Yeah.
And I do it today as well when I visit offices or sites. I do not only meet with our senior leaders or our commercial leaders or our management team. I also go around and speak to whoever is there.
Yeah.
because that's where you really can put your finger on the pulse and see what is happening. So
That's fantastic. Yeah, no, I can see that that would be so much admired, by people, and
And it
also,
was
like you
fun,
say,
actually.
yeah,
I
it's fun.
enjoyed it. It
Yeah,
was fun. It was
I'm
actually
sure.
fun. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Miriam, I think we're reaching the hour now, and I just want to say huge thanks for your time. It's been lovely to catch up with you, and I think
Likewise.
that there are many different, many different learnings coming out of this, and I think our listening community would very much appreciate it. So, thank you, Miriam, and I look
No,
forward to
thank
seeing you
you.
soon. I hope. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Cheerio, Miriam.
Bye-bye.
Bye
Bye.
bye. Bye bye.